Now, on the west side of the state, the Ottawa County Sheriff confirms tonight that the deaths of a family of 8 are being investigated as a murder.
The husband suspected of killing his wife and 6 children, ranging in age from 5 to 15.
So many in disbelief. Amanda, known as Mandy, Karolkiewicz, and her 6 children all killed. Her husband, Christopher, is accused of shooting all of them.
Imagine tucking your children into bed on a Thursday night, all 6 of them. The teenager who still lets you say goodnight, the 11-year-old twins who share a room, the 5-year-old who needs the hallway light left on, and by sunrise, every single one of them is gone. Not an accident, not a stranger who broke in through a window, not a fire that started in the wiring while everyone slept. The person responsible was already inside the house. He had a key. He had been there for years. This is the story of the Karolkiewicz family of Grand Haven Township, Michigan. A mother, a father, 6 children. All 8 of them found inside their own burning home on a Friday morning in July, on a quiet street where nothing ever happened. For most of that first day, the community was terrified that someone had come for them. Nobody had. Before we go any further, please subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications, because this case did not stop when the fire went out. In the days that followed, 2 separate discoveries surfaced that changed how everyone understood what happened in that house. One of them came from his employer. The other came from her. From something she wrote herself, publicly, 2 years before she died, that nobody connected to her name until it was far too late. What investigators pulled out of the ashes was not the beginning of this story. It was the end of one that had already been written down.
This should never happen to anybody.
Mandy's parents telling Local 4 that Mandy was, quote, a kind and devoted soul who loved her family and her students. Mandy, an author and active on social media, sharing family photos and videos of her travels like this one.
Okay, the girls and I are in Shanghai.
Also a teacher at Grand Haven Public Schools. The school saying earlier this year that Mandy, quote, goes above and beyond, responding with empathy, patience, and care, and pours her heart into her work.
Grand Haven Township sits on the eastern shore of Lake Michigan, about a half-hour drive west of Grand Rapids. Roughly 18,000 people, the kind of place where the summer traffic is beach traffic, where the trees close over the roads, and where a neighborhood can go decades without a single serious call to the sheriff's office. The Karolkiewicz family lived in Riverwood, a wooded subdivision, winding streets, mature trees, houses set back from the road. Theirs was a 2-story home in the 14,900 block of Riverside Trail, not far from a bayou off the Grand River. 8 people lived in that house, 2 adults, 6 children, and a small collection of pets, several dogs. At least 1 cat. Neighbors saw the kids constantly, waiting for the school bus, in and out of each other's houses, the way children do in a neighborhood where everyone knows everyone. That is the picture on the outside. Hold on to it, because it matters later. On the morning of Friday, July 24th, 2026, somewhere between 8:30 and 9, calls started coming into Ottawa County Dispatch. Not about a fire, about a smell. Somebody near Riverside Trail could smell smoke. That was it. No flames, no column of black rising over the trees. Just that unmistakable smell drifting through a residential street on a summer morning. Deputies responded. So did the Grand Haven Township Fire Department. They drove the area, they looked, and they found nothing. No visible fire, no structure showing smoke. Nothing to point at. So they cleared the call and they left. Sit with that for a moment. At 8:30 in the morning, emergency crews were physically on that street, trained people, looking for exactly the thing that was already happening. And they drove away, because from the outside of that house, there was nothing to see. Everyone inside was already gone. This is not a failure of the firefighters, and it would be lazy to turn it into one. A smell of smoke with no visible source is one of the hardest calls in the job. Smoke drifts. It carries from a fire pit, a chimney, a grill, a house 2 streets over. Crews chase that smell constantly and find nothing, because usually there is nothing. But it is still one of the most haunting details in this entire case, because for roughly 3 more hours, that house sat there, doors closed, curtains drawn, cars in the driveway, looking exactly like every other house on the street, while inside, a fire was doing what fires do when they have nowhere to go and nothing to feed on yet. It was smoldering, slowly, quietly, building. At 11:42 in the morning, the phones lit up again. This time, nobody had to describe a smell. They could see it. White smoke was pouring out of the house on Riverside Trail. Dispatch traffic described a residence full of smoke, with smoke pushing from a window. A neighbor named Julie Hoover was outside when it happened. She saw the white smoke coming from the side of the house, and then she watched the front window blow out. That is what a fire does when it has been starved of air for hours and finally gets some. Fire crews came back to the same street they had left that morning. This time, they took what firefighters call an offensive approach. That means they went in. They worked to knock the fire down, clear the smoke, and search the structure for anyone who might still be inside. Standard procedure. Every fire, every time. You find the people first. They found 8, 2 adults, 6 children, throughout the home. And almost immediately the fire scene stopped being a fire scene. Because when deputies from the Ottawa County Sheriff's Office got inside, it became clear that some of the people in that house had not died in a fire at all. There were gunshot wounds. By that afternoon, detectives were on scene, and what had started as a routine call about smoke on a summer morning had become one of the most devastating investigations in the history of West Michigan. That evening, Ottawa County Sheriff's Captain Jacob Sparks stood in front of reporters and told them what almost nothing. Not because he was hiding something, because he genuinely did not know yet. He confirmed 8 dead, 6 children, ages 5 to 15, 2 adults. He said they believed everyone in the house was from one family. He said some had been shot, but could not say how many. Causes of death had not been determined. Not everyone had been positively identified. He described the scene using 2 words reporters repeated for days. He called it complicated. He called it complex. Autopsies were scheduled for the weekend. Michigan State Police arson investigators were being brought in. And in the gap between that press conference and the answers, the entire community was left to imagine. Here is what happens when a family of 8 is found dead in a burning house, and nobody in authority will say why. People assume the worst thing they can imagine from the outside. An intruder, a home invasion gone catastrophically wrong, someone with a grudge, something that came from out there and got in here. For about 48 hours, that fear moved through Grand Haven Township like weather. Parents thinking about their own doors, kids texting each other, neighbors on that street looking at their windows differently. Because if a family of 8 can be wiped out in a subdivision like that, then nowhere is what it looks like. Grand Haven Area Public Schools put out a statement acknowledging a devastating incident involving the loss of multiple lives, including several school-age children. The district was on summer break. There was no building for students to walk into and no counselor's office already open. So they announced they were preparing to deploy support, and they published a list of mental health resources for anyone struggling. Superintendent Kristen Perkowski said the district grieved alongside everyone impacted and asked people to care for themselves and each other while the community processed it. The district also asked for something else, something that becomes one of the most important threads in this entire story. They asked people to respect the privacy of those involved and to avoid speculation, to avoid sharing anything that had not been officially confirmed. That request went out on a Saturday. By Sunday, it had already lost. Nobody organized what happened next. No church committee, no school administration, no grief counseling nonprofit with a plan. A kid did it. His name is Evan Cook. He was about to start his freshman year at Grand Haven High School. He was friends with one of the Karolkiewicz children, and when he found out what had happened, he decided something had to be done, and he did not wait for an adult to tell him what. His father later said his son wanted to pull something together, and that he wanted the right people involved. Church officials came, grief counselors came, and on Sunday evening, around 7:30, roughly 200 people or more gathered at Duncan Woods. Teenagers, mostly, classmates, kids who had been in that house, kids who had sat at that kitchen table. There were tables of food and drinks. There were poster boards covered in photographs of the family, propped up against a tree. There were candles. At one point, dozens of people held hands in a prayer circle. And the thing about a vigil organized by teenagers is that nobody has smoothed the edges off yet. When those kids spoke, they said what they actually felt. One of them called it dark, called it evil. Another remembered one of the boys as genuinely funny, the kind of kid who could throw a joke and take one right back. He said he had been over to that house a few times, and that the whole family was awesome. Another remembered meeting the mother once and described her as kind and caring. Understand what that means? These are children describing a household they had personally been inside of. From the couch, from the kitchen, from being fed dinner and driven home, and every one of them described warmth. The next day, a therapist named Jo Young stopped at the memorial outside the home. She had never met the family, not once. She said she wanted to honor lives lost even though she did not know them, and that hearing 8 people were gone reached her heart and her soul. Strangers, standing in the rain, beside a memorial covered with a tarp to protect it. Because inside the county building, the answers were about to land. The autopsies were completed at Corewell Health Blodgett Hospital. On Monday, July 27th, the Ottawa County Sheriff's Office held a second press conference. Captain Jacob Sparks stood up first and read a statement on behalf of Sheriff Eric DeBoer. Before any facts, before any timeline, the sheriff wanted to say one thing, that this was far more than a news story, that it personally impacted dozens, if not hundreds, of people in that county. He named them, the families, the neighbors, the co-workers, the teachers, and the students of Grand Haven Public Schools, the friends. And then he called it what it was, an unspeakable tragedy that they may never completely understand. Then came the facts. The adults were identified as Christopher Karolkiewicz, 47 years old, and Amanda Karolkiewicz, 39. They were married. The 6 children would not be named. That was a deliberate decision. The sheriff's office released only ages and genders. 4 boys, ages 15, 12, 11, and 5. 2 girls, both 11. 4 of the children were biological, 2 were adopted. All 8 died of gunshot wounds, and then the sentence that reframed everything. The manner of death for Amanda and all 6 children was ruled homicide. The manner of death for Christopher was ruled suicide. There was no intruder, there was no home invasion, there was no stranger. The fear that had been sitting over that township for 3 days was wrong. What actually happened was worse, because it meant the danger had never come from outside at all. Sparks confirmed there were no suspects at large. He confirmed the weapon used was a handgun registered to Christopher Karolkiewicz. He said that based on the evidence recovered at the scene, no one else had fired it. Just him. Only him, from the beginning of that night to the end of it. Here is where the timeline turns genuinely difficult to sit with. Investigators do not believe this happened in one sudden explosive moment on Friday morning. They believe it started the night before. Sparks said they believe the incident could have begun Thursday evening and carried over into the early morning hours of Friday. And his reasoning was straightforward. There were reports of the smell of smoke in the area early that morning. That told him something had already happened well before anyone saw flames. The fire smoldered. Then it grew. Then, hours later, it became visible, which means that for a stretch of time that may have covered most of a night, something was unfolding inside that house that nobody outside of it knew anything about. No neighbor called. No alarm was raised. Nobody on that street had the faintest idea. And when detectives worked the scene, they found no signs of a struggle, no indication of a fight. The people inside were found in bedrooms throughout the house. Sparks was asked directly whether neighbors had reported hearing anything the night before. His answer was that they were still working on it, that there were hours and hours of investigation ahead, canvassing, video canvassing, running down leads. Then came the fire. Michigan State Police fire and arson investigators were working to determine cause and origin, and the official report was not finished. But the preliminary indications were clear enough that Sparks said them out loud. The fire was intentionally set in numerous different places throughout the interior of the home, both the first floor and the basement. And critically, it was set after, not during, not as part of whatever happened earlier that night. After, the basement was more heavily damaged than the main floor. Some areas of the house were badly burned, others were spared. The family pets died from the fire and the smoke. When a reporter asked what evidence pointed to the fire being deliberate, Sparks answered simply, "Various spots lit throughout the residence, on both floors. That is not an accident. That is not a candle. That is not faulty wiring. That is a person moving through a house, room to room, floor to floor, doing something over and over again." So the question sits there. Was the fire meant to destroy evidence, or was it meant to destroy everything that was left, so that nothing of that household survived at all? Investigators have not said. They may never be able to. But here is what fire does not do. It does not erase, it delays. It buys hours. And in this case, those hours are exactly what happened. 8:30 in the morning came and went, and nobody knew.
Well, I guess, we're fact finders, and so we look for facts. Sometimes people like to reach out with a supposition or their opinions on things, and that's not as helpful as people might think at times. It gives us more stuff to sift through. So if they have some fact-based past or history or knowledge of this couple, this family, that they think should be helpful, I encourage them to reach out to either the sheriff's office or Sound Observer. But yeah, we're not looking for opinions or internet sleuths and that type of thing.
Reporters asked the obvious question. Was anything left behind? A letter? A message? Anything that would explain a state of mind? Sparks said they were still going through everything. And then he said something that a lot of people missed in the moment. He said there was no specific note, but there was a lot of documentation seized from the scene, and that they were going to process it, and that it would take a while to get through. A follow-up question asked whether those papers had survived the fire. His answer was that damage varied throughout the house. Some items were recovered, others were badly burned. It depended on where they were. So think about what that means. No note, no manifesto, no explanation addressed to anyone, but boxes of something, records, paperwork, enough that a captain in front of a press conference described going through it as something that would take time. Whatever answer exists in this case, if one exists at all, it may be sitting in a partially burned stack of paper in an evidence room in Ottawa County. Or it may never have been written down anywhere at all. Sparks also confirmed two facts that gutted the standard true crime playbook. There was no record of any previous law enforcement call to that home. Ever, not one. And Christopher Karolkiewicz had no prior criminal history. No domestic calls, no welfare checks, no arrests. Nothing that would put that address on anybody's radar. That should unsettle us. Because in most cases like this, the paper trail exists. There are calls, there are reports, there are neighbors who knew. There is a pattern everyone looks back at afterward and says, "We should have seen it." Here, there was no trail to look back at. So investigators started looking somewhere else. From the outside, Christopher Karolkiewicz's life looked like the version people worked their whole careers toward. He was 47. He worked remotely from that house in a senior leadership role at a national organization. For days, that organization was not named publicly. Reporters described it in vague terms, a national health organization, a well-known nonprofit. On Tuesday, July 28th, that changed. The American Heart Association confirmed it. Christopher Karolkiewicz had been an employee of the American Heart Association from September of 2023. He served as a national vice president of sales and marketing, and the division he supported was the one responsible for CPR and first aid training and products. Read that again. His job was the arm of the American Heart Association that teaches people how to keep another human being alive. Chest compressions, rescue breathing. First aid, the training handed to teachers, coaches, lifeguards, flight attendants, parents. The stuff you learn so that if the worst happens in front of you, you know what to do with your hands. That was what he sold and marketed nationally. The organization also clarified that he worked remotely and was not involved with their Michigan offices or their local Michigan operations. And they said they were devastated by the news out of Grand Haven and that their thoughts were with the loved ones of everyone who lost their lives. But it was one specific phrase in that statement that reporters seized on. The American Heart Association said his employment ended earlier that month, in July of 2026. Weeks, not months, weeks before July 24th. And that is where the statement stopped. They did not say he resigned. They did not say he was terminated. They did not say why. They did not say when in July, or under what circumstances, or whether it was mutual, or whether it was sudden. 2 words, employment ended, and then silence. So the natural instinct kicks in. Everyone reaches for it at the same time. That is the reason. That is the trigger. He lost the job, he lost the identity, he lost the income, and something broke. Investigators have not named a motive. Not one. Sparks was asked directly at that press conference whether there were any triggers for Chris, whether it was a job or anything else, and he said plainly that they were only just beginning the investigative portion. The first day had been almost entirely scene work. They were only now digging into background and motive. He did not have it. The American Heart Association drew no connection whatsoever between his departure and what happened, and no evidence has been made public linking the 2 events beyond the fact that they happened close together on a calendar. Weeks apart is a fact. Because of is not. There is also a simpler reason to be skeptical. People lose senior jobs every single day in this country. Executives get pushed out. Careers end abruptly and without public explanation. And overwhelmingly, those people go home, they grieve it, and they start over. They do not do this. So if the end of that job played any role at all, it was almost certainly not the whole of it. It was one pressure on top of something else, something that had been there longer. Which raises the question that investigators were now chasing and that the public had no way to answer. What was actually happening inside that house? Not what it looked like from the school bus stop, not what it looked like on Facebook. Inside. And then, 2 days after the bodies were identified, a local newspaper found something that police had not mentioned once. The Holland Sentinel is a local paper in Ottawa County, small, regional, part of the USA Today network, not the kind of newsroom that usually breaks the biggest detail in a national story. On Monday, July 27th, one of their reporters found a Reddit account. The username was Mandy K1179. Now, an anonymous username proves nothing on its own. Anyone can claim to be anyone. So the paper did the work. They compared the details in that account against what law enforcement had released and against public record. Marriage dates, ages, the number of children, the occupations, the place they lived, it matched, all of it. The Sentinel confirmed the account was authentic. The Detroit News did the same thing separately and reached the same conclusion. Other outlets verified it independently afterward. That account belonged to Amanda Karolkiewicz, and it was not one post. It was dozens, written roughly 2 years earlier, in 2024. Some of it is completely ordinary. It reads like a woman living a life. A then aspiring teacher raising 6 kids in a small Michigan town, mentioning restaurants she liked, talking about her days. But a large portion of that account was posted in one specific place, a subreddit called As One After Infidelity. It is a peer support forum. It exists for couples who are trying to rebuild a marriage after one partner is cheated. That is not a place people post casually. That is a place people go when they are in the middle of something. And what she wrote there, in her own words, 2 years before she died, is the reason this case looks different now than it did on the day of the fire. She wrote about how they met. She had been an intern at the company where he worked. He was a colleague, older than her, and divorced at the time. And then she wrote about what she believed happened roughly a decade later, with 5 children in the house by then. She wrote that he was involved with an intern again, the same age she had been when she was the intern. She wrote about red flags. She said he had always had major ones, that she had ignored them, and she connected that to her own trauma and anxious attachment. She wrote about repeated dishonesty, about counseling. And then the thing anyone who has ever felt trapped in a marriage will recognize instantly. She wrote that with 6 kids, the idea of leaving was terrifying. She described about a year of self-loathing, a moment of looking at herself in a mirror and realizing how unfair it was that she was the one living miserably. And she described the calculation she made to stay. She said she kept telling herself she loved her kids more than she hated her husband in that moment. She said the children had no idea. She said she faked it until they made it. Now I need to slow down, because this is the point where most coverage of this case turns into something ugly, and I do not want to do that. Those posts are real. They were verified by professional newsrooms using a documented method. They are part of the record now. But here is what they do not do. They do not explain what happened on July 24th. They do not predict it. They do not make it make sense. Look at the timeline of what she wrote. Those posts are from 2024, and the events she describes in them were already years old by the time she wrote them. She said explicitly that they were in a much better place roughly 4.5 years out. She also said it was still a fight to stay in a healthy place. That is not the writing of a woman in imminent danger. That is a woman who has been through something, who has done the work, and who is being honest that the other side is not effortless. She was posting in a recovery forum, not a crisis forum, and consider the scale of this. There are millions of marriages in this country where somebody cheated, and the couple stayed and went to counseling, and years later they are fine, or they are not fine, but everyone is alive. Nobody dies. An affair does not lead to this. Marital difficulty does not lead to this. Job loss does not lead to this. All of those things are survived by enormous numbers of ordinary people every year without a single person being harmed. So what those posts actually give us is not a motive. What they give us is context. They tell us that the picture the world had of that family, the one on Facebook and at school pickup and at birthday parties, was not the complete picture. That there had been strain inside that house years earlier that almost nobody outside of it knew about. That is worth knowing. It is not worth turning into a verdict, and that distinction matters more in this case than in almost any other, because of what her family did next. Before we get to that, there is one more thing you need to know about the last week of Amanda Karolkiewicz's life. She had just gotten back from the trip of a lifetime. The 2 11-year-old girls in that house were adopted from China, and earlier in July of 2026, Mandy took them there to see the country they were born in. She documented it, she posted it on TikTok, she was smiling. In one post, she is dressed in traditional Hanfu clothing, hair done, makeup done, in the middle of an experience she described as the coolest. On July 16th, she posted about what an awesome experience it was with her precious daughters. She said they were so proud of their Chinese heritage. She and the girls flew home on July 17th. 8 days after that post, all 3 of them were dead. She was killed a week after what may have been the best trip she ever took. She came home from giving her daughters something most adopted children never get, walked back into that house, and had 7 days left. Her cousin, Emily Stoy-Jones, said travel was one of Mandy's great joys, but that nothing came before her family, that her kids were in everything she did. Jones said something else that stays with you. She held up a small heart-shaped trinket box while she was talking to reporters. Mandy gave it to her years ago. She keeps it by the kitchen sink, so her wedding ring stays clean while she washes dishes. That is the scale of this. A woman is gone, and what is left is a trinket box by a sink.
Okay, let's do an unboxing. I've wanted this bag for a really long time. Look at my new pretty lavender jade bracelet, my jade color purse. Okay, oh, crossbody strap, we need that. Oh, it's so pretty. Oh yeah, this is so pretty. See why I needed it in the jade? Okay, look. Isn't that so pretty? Okay. We can get the plastic off that little lock.
Amanda Karolkiewicz worked as a substitute teacher at Peach Plains Elementary in the Grand Haven Area Public Schools District. Substitute teaching is a job that is designed to be forgettable. You are the person who is not the real teacher. Kids test you. You are there for a day or a week, and then you are gone and nobody remembers your name. Mandy was not forgettable. The district had actually recognized her publicly months earlier in a social media post back in January for how she worked with students. They described her as someone who went above and beyond, who responded to kids with empathy, patience, and care. That is a school district taking time to publicly single out a substitute teacher. That does not happen for people who are just filling a slot. Her cousin said she had a gift for making people feel seen in small, everyday ways. Her mother and stepfather, Becky and Steve Lawwill, issued a statement after their daughter was identified. They said Mandy was a kind and devoted soul who loved her family and her students. They said they treasured every moment they had with her and her 6 children, and that words could not adequately express their devastation. They said they were praying for peace and comfort as they grieved and honored their lives. Read that once more. Their daughter and 6 grandchildren in one night, and there is more history under that. This is not the first catastrophe that family has absorbed. In 2020, Mandy's family lost her adult stepbrother to a fentanyl overdose. They had already buried someone. Here is what makes this case feel so strange in 2026. The Karolkiewicz family left a public record of themselves, and it is still there. Mandy kept a blog for years and stopped updating it in 2016. In it, she wrote about her Christian faith, about the joy she took in her family, about her love and appreciation for her husband, and about him as a father. They married in August of 2009. Their first child, a son, was born in April of 2011, and she called that day the best of her life so far. 2 more sons followed. She moved from a banking job to a part-time position at an insurance agency and eventually stopped working outside the home. The couple later adopted the 2 girls and had 1 more son. And Christopher left something too. In 2019, ahead of their 10th wedding anniversary, he wrote on Facebook that he was a very lucky guy. That post is still findable. When she stopped blogging, she moved to TikTok and kept posting family updates right up until that trip to China. So there is this entire archive. Years of it. A woman documenting a life she seemed to genuinely love. A man saying publicly that he could not believe his luck. And a completely separate account, under a different name, in a support forum, describing something else entirely. Both of those are real. Both were true at the same time. That is how most people live. The public version and the private version run in parallel, and the public one is not a lie. It is just partial. But it means anyone trying to reconstruct that house has 2 contradictory records and no way to know which was closer to the truth in the final weeks. By the Sunday after the fire, before police had even confirmed how anyone died, theories were everywhere. Facebook groups, true crime pages, comment sections, videos, people who had never been within 1,000 miles of Grand Haven Township building narratives out of nothing. And Mandy's sister had enough. Her name is Molly Cessna. She posted a long message on Facebook, and it was not a polite request. She asked people not to feed the theories, not to share the theories, not to give them views. She said speculation is toxic. She said that anyone commenting theories about what might have happened was causing real pain. And she specifically said it was worst when it involved the children. She said the people who loved them know what happened. She is right that speculation is corrosive. She is right that inventing motives for a grieving family to read is cruel. And she is right that the children deserve to not become a plot point. That is why this video has not named any of the 6 children. The sheriff's office deliberately withheld their names, and there is no version of this story that becomes clearer or more meaningful by putting 6 kids' names on a screen. Some outlets published them, sourced from relatives and property records. That was their call. This is ours. And that is also why nothing in this video has invented anything. Everything here came from the sheriff's office, from the medical examiner's findings, From the American Heart Association's own statement, from newsrooms that verified their sourcing, and from the family's own public words. But there is a second voice in that same family, and it is worth listening to as carefully as the first. Mandy's cousin, Emily Stoy Jones, told reporters that everybody wants to know why. She said it is unfathomable. She said they need to know why. She said they still want to know. She asked for it to make sense just a little because it does not. That family said it plainly. They hope police keep searching for a motive. So this is not a case where the family wants it dropped. This is a case where the family wants the truth and is begging people to stop manufacturing substitutes for it while they wait. Those are two completely different things. They are also, at this moment, planning 7 funerals. There are details in the aftermath of this case that most people scroll past, and they are worth stating clearly. A prayer service was held at St. Patrick Church in Grand Haven on Monday, July 27th at 5:30 in the evening. The church said they continued to pray for the family and for the friends who grieve. Friends of Mandy's parents launched a fundraiser. The organizers wrote that Becky and Steve Lawwill lost their daughter and 6 beloved grandchildren, and that no words capture that kind of heartbreak. The stated purpose of the fund is worth noting exactly as written, because it has caused confusion. The funds go first toward legal expenses. Anything remaining after that goes toward establishing a scholarship in the children's memory. People online have tried to read something into the word legal. There is nothing established there to read. When 8 members of one household die at once, including 6 minors, in a house that burned, the estate and probate work alone is enormous. There is no public information suggesting anything beyond that, and guessing at it is exactly what the family asked people to stop. The sheriff's office also did something that tells you the case is genuinely still moving. They asked the public for information. Anyone with anything is asked to contact the Ottawa County Sheriff's Office or Silent Observer at 1-877-88 silent. You do 7788 silent. You do not put out a tip line on a case you consider finished. So let us be honest about where this actually stands, because a lot of coverage is pretending to more certainty than exists. The forensic questions are answered. We know all 8 died of gunshot wounds. We know 7 of those deaths were ruled homicides. We know 1 was ruled a suicide. We know the weapon was registered to him and that the evidence indicates nobody else fired it. We know the fires were set deliberately in multiple places after. Those are settled. Almost nothing else is. We do not know the order of events. We do not know what happened between Thursday evening and the early hours of Friday morning, or what set it in motion, or how long it took. Investigators have given a window, not a sequence. We do not know whether anyone heard anything that night. Sparks said they were still canvassing, still pulling video, still running leads. Whatever neighbors did or did not hear, it has not been made public. We do not know why his job ended. Not the reason, not the circumstances, not who made the decision. The American Heart Association said 2 words and stopped, and they are under no obligation to say more. We do not know whether that mattered at all. No investigator has connected it to anything. We do not know what is in the documents seized from that house. Sparks said processing it would take a while. That work is presumably still happening right now. We do not know if there were warning signs. And this is the part that keeps coming back around. There were no police calls to that home. No criminal history, no documented incidents. The people who were physically inside that house, the kids' friends, described warmth. The school district publicly praised her months before. Her own family, who talked to her constantly, are the ones saying it does not make sense, and we may never know any of it, because the only person who could explain what happened made sure he would never have to. That is what separates this from most cases. Usually by now, there is a motive on the table, a financial trail, a relationship collapsing in public, a restraining order, a pattern of escalation that everyone can point at afterward. Here, investigators have documents, records, and devices, and, so far, no explanation. Whatever this was, it lived inside one person's head, and he took it with him. There is a temptation with a case like this to find the red flag, to locate the moment everyone missed, so we can walk away believing that if we pay attention, we will catch it in our own lives. I understand that impulse. It is a survival instinct. If there was a sign, then signs exist, and signs can be seen. But look honestly at what is here. An affair, years earlier, that the marriage had reportedly moved past. A job that ended weeks before, for reasons nobody has stated. A woman who had just taken her daughters across the world and posted about how proud she was of them. 6 kids whose friends thought their house was the best house to hang out at. A neighborhood where nobody had ever called the police. Individually, none of those is a warning. Millions of families have every single one of those elements, and nothing happens. Which means the honest and far more uncomfortable conclusion might be this: there may not have been an obvious red flag to miss. That is harder to accept than the alternative. It is easier to believe a community failed to notice something than to believe there was nothing visible to notice. But sometimes the thing that goes wrong entirely on the inside of one person, and the outside never changes at all. It forces a question that goes far past this one family. How well can any of us actually know what is happening behind someone else's front door? We have never had more access to each other's lives than we do right now. There is a blog, there are TikToks, there are anniversary posts, there is a school district publicly praising her work. There is a photograph of a woman in traditional dress in China, smiling with her daughters, 8 days before the end. And all of it, every single piece of that public record, pointed the wrong way. That is not a failure of attention. That is the limit of what a public record can tell you. 8 people, 1 address, 1 night. A mother who made kids feel seen for a living and who had just given her daughters their birth country. A 15-year-old, a 12-year-old, 2 11-year-old boys and girls in that house, a 5-year-old, pets that belonged to children who named them, 7 funerals for one family, and an 8th person nobody quite knows what to do with. The case remains open. Michigan State Police arson investigators are still working the origin of the fire. Ottawa County detectives are still processing what they took out of that house. The sheriff's office has publicly said they will do their best to find answers and to honor the memory of those victims. Maybe they will find something in that paperwork. Maybe there is nothing there. If there is an update, this channel will cover it, and it will cover it the same way. Confirmed facts only, no invented motives, and no 6 names on a screen. So, I will leave you with the only useful thing that comes out of a story like this. If you know someone who seems like they are carrying more than they are letting on, reach out. And when they tell you they are fine, ask the second question, not just the first one, because the version people say out loud is almost never the whole version, and the cost of asking twice is nothing. If you are struggling, or if anything in this story hit close to home for you, please reach out to someone. In the United States, the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is available by call or text, 24 hours a day. You can also text the crisis text line by texting the word HOME to 741-741. Talking to someone is not a last resort. It is just a phone call, and people answer it. If this case affected you the way it affected everyone who worked on it, say so in the comments. And if you want this channel to keep following the story as the investigation develops, please subscribe and turn on notifications, because when there is an update, this is where it will be. Until then, look out for each other, ask the second question, and I will see you in the next one.